She was the most beautiful woman in every room she ever entered. And because of that, no one ever looked closer. She was black, breathtaking, and composed, the kind of woman whose presence silenced a room before she ever spoke. She wore champagne gold and carried herself like sunlight. She smiled softly at the right moments. She asked gentle questions. She never raised her voice. And her husband, the most feared Korean mafia boss in Seoul, loved her the way powerful men love beautiful things. From a distance, behind glass, like something precious that needed to be preserved rather than understood. He never asked what she was thinking. He never imagined she was thinking at all. While he sat at the head of a table surrounded by his most dangerous men, unable to solve the crisis that was about to cost him everything, she was 40 meters away in the dark, fingers moving across a keyboard, dismantling his enemy's entire financial empire without making a single sound. $847 million. Gone. 4 banks across 3 countries, locked from the inside. A criminal cartel brought to its knees by the woman everyone had already dismissed. And when he finally found her signature buried inside 4 elegant lines of code, those 3 small letters that she had left on purpose, everything he thought he knew about his own life collapsed in a single breath. He had built an empire on the belief that he could see further than anyone around him. He never once looked beside him. But what she did next, and why she chose to let him find out, will change the way you see everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a city like Seoul after midnight. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of everything still moving, but moving quietly, beneath the surface, in the places where light does not reach and cameras do not point. On the 42nd floor of a building that had no public address and accepted no visitors without prior arrangement, that silence pressed itself against the floor-to-ceiling windows like something alive. The city stretched endlessly below, a river of amber and white light, 10 million people folded into a grid that never truly slept. Inside, the apartment was the kind of beautiful that required no explanation. Clean lines, imported stone, furniture that had been chosen not for comfort, but for the specific message it communicated to anyone who entered, that the man who lived here had already won. And Seon Jae-Ho had, by almost every measure that the world he inhabited recognized, won completely. He sat at the head of a table that had seen decisions made over it that no court would ever hear about. Around him, 4 men, each one experienced, each one loyal in the particular way that men are loyal when the alternative is unthinkable. They were looking at numbers. The numbers were not good. The Kwon network had been bleeding them quietly for months. Not through violence. Violence was loud. Violence created problems. Violence left evidence. What Kwon Do-hyun had done was more elegant and more infuriating than violence. He had found the seams. Every financial route the Sun organization opened, the Kwon organization knew about within 3 days. Every account, every shell structure, every overseas arrangement, compromised before it could breathe. Jae-Ho listened to his men explain what he already understood. He did not interrupt. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing a man in his position could do was let other people see him thinking. So he sat, and he was still, and he let them talk. and behind his eyes he was building a structure of possible responses and discarding them one by one. None of the responses were sufficient. The problem was not one that could be solved with the tools he had always used. The problem existed in a layer of reality that his hands could not reach. In servers, in encrypted corridors, in the architecture of systems that moved money the way water moves through stone, finding paths no one thought to seal. He needed someone who could go where he could not. He did not yet know that person was already in his home. Down the hall, behind a door he had never thought to question, his wife sat cross-legged on a chair that she had positioned specifically to face the window, with her laptop open and her fingers moving in a way that bore no resemblance to anything he had ever imagined her doing. Amara Seon had heard every word of that meeting through the small device she had installed 18 months ago. Not in the meeting room, but in the ventilation seam adjacent to it, in a position that took her 40 minutes to calibrate, and that no one had found because no one had looked. She was not angry at what she heard. She was not frightened. She was calculating. She had been calculating, in one form or another, since she was 12 years old in Lagos, and first understood that the world would always be willing to look at her and see only the surface. And that this was not a wound. It was a weapon. It was, if handled correctly, the most precise instrument a person could carry. She thought about the Kwan banking architecture. She had already mapped 3 of the 4 institutions months before, not because she had planned this moment specifically, but because she never entered any environment without understanding its infrastructure. It was reflex. It was the way some people checked the exits of a room when they walked in. She knew where the weakness was. She had known for 11 weeks. She closed one window on her screen and opened another, and the numbers that appeared there were not the numbers of a woman idly passing time. Outside, Seoul held its breath. She began. The weakness was not where anyone would have thought to look. That was always the way with systems built by people who trusted their own intelligence too completely. They fortified the obvious entry points, the front doors, the main corridors, the places that appeared on organizational charts and compliance reports. They hired people to watch those places. They invested in layers of protection that were visible precisely because visibility was itself a form of intimidation. What they did not protect was the seam. Every structure has one. A place where 2 systems meet and neither one claims full ownership of the junction. A place that exists in the administrative gap between departments, between vendors, between the version of the software that was supposed to be updated and the version that was still running because no one had scheduled the migration yet. The Kwan financial network ran across 4 private banking institutions. Each one was, individually, well defended. But all 4 of them used the same third-party accounting software. A platform built by a mid-sized firm in Taipei that had been acquired by a larger company 2 years prior. And in the transition between ownership structures, a patch that should have been deployed in the first quarter had been delayed, and then delayed again, and then quietly forgotten in the way that administrative responsibilities are forgotten when no one is certain whose desk they belong to. The vulnerability had existed for 14 months. Amara had found it in 3 hours. She had not exploited it then. She had documented it, filed it in an encrypted folder she kept on a drive that existed on no network, and moved on. She had not known, at that point, that she would ever need it. She had simply noted it the way a careful person notes a loose step on a staircase they use regularly. Not because they plan to fall, but because they prefer to know. Now, sitting in the quiet of the apartment while her husband and his men sat 40 meters away, unable to solve a problem she had already solved in her mind, she opened that folder. The entry was clean. She did not force anything. Forcing created noise, and noise created traces, and traces were the only thing that could connect what was about to happen to the woman in the champagne dress sitting cross-legged in the dark. She moved through the system the way she had always moved through systems, not like someone breaking in, but like someone who had always had the key and was simply now choosing to use it. She followed the architecture the way you follow the logic of a building someone else designed, understanding the decisions that were made at each junction, anticipating the next corridor before she reached it. The first institution took 22 minutes. The second took less, because its configuration was nearly identical. The same vendor, the same overlooked seam, the same 14 months of quiet vulnerability waiting for someone patient enough to find it. By the time she reached the third institution, it was past 2 in the morning. She had not moved from the chair except once, briefly, to get water. She drank it without looking away from the screen. This was the part that other people who imagined hackers as frantic, urgent, surrounded by cascading red warnings and dramatic countdowns, would not have recognized as what it was. It was methodical. It was slow in the way that surgery is slow. Every action considered before it was executed. Every consequence mapped 2 steps ahead. She was not stealing the money. That was the detail that no one would ever fully understand, because no one would ever be allowed to fully see what she had done. She was not moving the funds to any account that could be traced to herself, to Jae-Ho, or to any structure connected to the Sun organization. She was not enriching anyone. She was doing something more damaging and more precise than theft. She was making the money disappear into a bureaucratic labyrinth so dense, so deliberately constructed, that recovering it would require years of legal action across 4 jurisdictions. Action that the Kwan organization could never pursue publicly without exposing the origin of the funds in the first place. She was not robbing them. She was turning their own money into a prison they could never talk about being trapped inside. The fourth institution took 37 minutes because its architecture was older and its logic less predictable. She moved through it carefully, the way you move through a room where the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. At 4:52 in the morning, she closed the final window. $847 million in Kwan assets were no longer where Kwan Do-hyun believed them to be. They were not anywhere, in any sense that could be quickly explained. She sat for a moment in the silence that followed, and looked at the city through the window. It looked exactly the same as it had 3 hours ago. That was the thing about this kind of act. It left no mark on the surface of the world. No sound, no fire, no broken glass. Just a set of numbers that would not be where they were supposed to be when someone went to look for them in the morning. She closed the laptop. She went to bed. She was asleep before 5. The call came at 9:14 in the morning. Jae-Ho was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that had gone slightly cold because he had forgotten to drink it, which was the kind of thing that happened to him only when something was occupying the part of his mind that normally managed small details. He had slept poorly. He had lain in the dark beside his wife and stared at the ceiling and turned the problem over and over, the way you turn something heavy in your hands looking for a handle. He had not found one. When the phone rang and he heard Park Sun-jin's voice on the other end, tight, controlled, but carrying underneath it a frequency of something very close to panic, he set the coffee down and was still. He listened without speaking for almost 2 full minutes. Then he said, "Find out who did this." He said it quietly. He always spoke quietly when the situation was serious. It was a habit he had developed over many years of understanding that volume was what men used when they had lost control of a room, and he had never allowed himself to lose control of a room. He hung up and stood at the counter for a long moment. Amara came in from the hallway in her white robe, her hair loose and extraordinary around her face, the gold bracelet catching the morning light as she reached past him for a piece of fruit from the bowl on the counter. She smelled like the soap she used, something light and clean, entirely out of place in the specific quality of that morning. She said good morning. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression he had seen 10,000 times. Open, warm, unhurried. The expression of a woman whose internal weather was always, apparently, mild. He said good morning. She took her fruit and went back toward the bedroom, and he watched her go. And then he looked at the counter, and then he looked at the doorway she had disappeared through. He did not think it. Not yet. The thought existed somewhere below the threshold of conscious formation, in the place where things are sensed before they are named. He did not reach for it. He went to deal with the crisis. The next 72 hours moved the way crises move inside closed organizations, fast and circular, generating enormous amounts of activity that produced very little clarity. Jae-Ho's technical people worked without sleeping. They pulled logs, traced fragments, reconstructed sequences. They found evidence of entry, but nothing that resolved into an origin. The signature of whatever had been done was clean in a way that was itself a kind of signature. The absence of chaos, the presence of patience, the sense of someone who had moved through those systems not urgently, but with complete familiarity. One of his analysts used the word elegant. Jae-Ho looked at him when he said it, but did not respond. On the third evening, Chae Min-soo knocked on the door of the room where Jae-Ho was sitting alone with the reports spread across the table in front of him. Min-soo was 24 years old and had the specific nervousness of someone who had found something important and was not certain how the importance would be received. He set the tablet on the table. He had isolated a fragment of code, 4 lines embedded in a sequence that was otherwise designed to dissolve. The 4 lines were not functional. They performed no operation within the attack itself. They were there for a different reason entirely. Jae-Ho looked at the screen. The characters were small but legible. A-O-S. The room did not change. The light did not shift. Nothing dramatic occurred in the external world to mark the moment. But something in Jae-Ho's chest moved in a way that had no name in the vocabulary he had built for himself over 38 years. He stared at those 3 letters. He thought about the bracelet, the small pendant shaped like a circuit that he had seen on her wrist for 2 years without once asking what it meant. He thought about the way she always went quiet when his conversations became technical. Not the quiet of someone lost, he now understood, but the quiet of someone listening more carefully than anyone in the room suspected. He thought about the second room she had asked to use as a study, and he had agreed to without interest because he had assumed, without examining the assumption, that whatever she did in there was decorative. He thought about every conversation he had not had with her because he had decided, somewhere along the way, and without quite deciding it consciously, that there was a category of his world that she did not belong in. He thought about how that decision had felt, at the time, like protection. He understood now, sitting in the specific silence of that realization, that it had been something else entirely. He told Min-soo to leave. He sat alone with those 3 letters for a long time. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked down the hall. She was on the veranda when he found her. He had known she would be. She liked the veranda in the late afternoon, when the light over Seoul turned from white to something warmer, and the city below began its slow transformation from its daytime self into its nighttime self. He had watched her stand there dozens of times from across the room, never asking what she was thinking, never considering that the answer might be something that would reorder everything he believed he understood about his own life. He slid the glass door open and stepped out. The air was cool. 42 floors below, the city moved without awareness of what was happening in this specific rectangle of space above it. She did not turn around. He stood behind her for a moment, and in that moment he understood something that he had never had occasion to understand before. That she had always known when he was in a room, even when her back was to the door. She had always known. She had simply never made a point of showing him that she knew. He said her name. She turned then, and her face was exactly what it always was. Composed, clear, with those eyes that he now looked at differently than he had looked at them this morning. Not different eyes, the same eyes, but he was finally looking at them without the filter of everything he had assumed. He held the tablet out toward her. The screen was still illuminated, the 4 characters still visible. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. She did not perform surprise. She did not perform anything. She simply stood in the truth of the moment with the same stillness she brought to everything, and waited. He asked her if it was her. She said yes. The word landed between them without apology and without drama, the way true things land when the person saying them has long since made peace with the truth and is only waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. He asked her how, and she told him. Not everything. Not the years in Lagos, not the recruited years, not the full architecture of what she had built and then quietly set aside. That would come later, in the slower time of trust being reconstructed on a foundation that was now, at least, honest. But she told him enough. She told him about the vulnerability, about the 14 months she had known it existed, about the 4 institutions and the third-party software and the administrative seam that no one had sealed because no one had known to look for it. He listened the way he listened in his most serious meetings, without interruption, without expression, processing everything behind a stillness that other people read as coldness, but that she had always understood was simply the way he handled information that mattered. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked her why she had left the signature. She held his gaze without wavering. She told him that she had left it because she was his wife, and she would not do something this significant inside their shared life and allow him to never know it had been her. She told him that she had lived for 2 years inside the shape of what he imagined her to be, and she had done it willingly, and she did not resent it. But she was not willing to save him from the shadows and then return to the shadows as though nothing had changed. She told him that if he wanted to know her, the actual her, not the version that was easy to look at and simple to love, then this was the door. She told him that it only opened from his side. He looked at her for a long time. And then Seon Jae-Ho, who had not been surprised by anything in longer than he could accurately remember, who had built an empire precisely on the principle that he could see further than the people around him and prepare for what they could not anticipate, exhaled. It was a small sound, almost nothing, but she heard it. He reached out and took her hand. Not the gesture of a man claiming something, the gesture of a man who has just understood that he was the one who had been found. He said, "Tell me everything." She looked at him for one more moment, measuring, deciding, and then deciding fully. She said, "Sit down." And the city below them continued its motion, indifferent and endless, while above it, 2 people began, for the first time, an honest conversation. One of them having just dismantled a criminal empire with 4 lines of elegant code, and the other finally ready to understand that the most powerful person in his world had been sleeping beside him for 2 years, waiting to be asked the right question. Neither of them noticed when the sun finished setting. Neither of them needed to. The night came in quietly over Seoul, and for once, the silence between them was not the silence of things unsaid. It was the silence of everything, finally, beginning.
What did you think about this story? Before you leave, let me introduce myself. I'm Angela Denise Carter, and I specialize in helping women break free from emotional confusion, recognize unhealthy patterns, and stop accepting less than they deserve. And I want to tell you something important. Maybe what touched you most was not just the story itself. Maybe it was how much it felt like something many women live through in silence. Women who keep trying to understand someone who only brings confusion. Women who over-explain themselves, who accept less than they deserve, who explain away signs that already hurt, and who slowly lose themselves just to keep connections that never brought them peace. If that spoke to you, I want to help you change that pattern. I created a 30-day process to help you see sooner, regain your emotional clarity, and stop accepting confusion, mixed signals, and less than you deserve. More than 50 women have already joined, and many of them are finally seeing clearly what they used to ignore. If this is your moment, you can join now through the QR code on the screen, the link in the description, or the pinned comment.
If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked straight at you and saw only what they wanted to see? Have you ever carried a version of yourself that was smaller than the truth, not because you were ashamed of who you were, but because you were waiting for someone to finally care enough to ask? And if you have ever loved someone deeply, truly, ask yourself honestly, have you ever made the mistake of loving the image of a person instead of taking the time to know who they actually are? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about hidden strength, the courage to be truly seen, and love that finally learns to look deeper, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.